At any rate, I called loudly for my stylographic pen and wrote him a letter to which he made no reply, and there it was. But it only goes to show that some people don't like you to mind your own business. By the by, I made a statement a minute or two ago which I'm afraid wasn't strictly accurate. I said that when this man's card was brought to me at the dinner, there was a speech going on. Well, actually, we don't have speeches in the generally accepted sense of the term. What merely happens is this. Supposing anyone does something clever or interesting, like flying to Australia and back, or motoring across China, or inventing something wonderful. We ask him to come and dine, and then afterwards he just gets up and spouts about it, describes his achievement in an informal kind of way. And we don't confine ourselves to respectable exploits either. If anyone were to break into the Bank of England and get away with £1 million, I'm quite sure we should ask him to come and tell us exactly how he did it. So you can see that in one way and another, we do get a good deal of amusement and instruction. But we don't attempt to get it for nothing. Oh no. There's an honorarium of 10 guineas, which we always hope that the guest of the evening will accept. And we're getting more and more sanguine about its getting accepted, because no one's ever refused it yet. You'd be surprised at some of the distinguished people to whom a tenner hasn't come amiss. In fact, the man who pouched my furtive envelope with the greatest gusto was a certain Chancellor of the Exchequer. I shan't say who he was. He'd come along and explained his budget to us. It isn't anyone's job in particular to procure these artists, but we all keep our eyes open for suitable turns. At all events, last March, I happened to come across a paragraph in the newspaper. It was tucked away in a corner, but it took my fancy very much. It was all about an Englishman called Kennedy, who'd escaped from a foreign prison. There's apparently a small island off the coast of Java, which the Dutch use as a convict settlement, and Kennedy was there serving a sentence of 10 years. Well, whether they weren't kind to him or he'd got tired of the place, I don't know. But one fine morning, he decided to leave. He climbed over the barbed wire when no one was looking and made straight for the house of the governor of the island. The governor wasn't in, so Master Kennedy went into his bedroom, put on one of his uniforms, and strolled down to the harbour. There, he borrowed the governor's motorboat and left the island flying the governor's flag. He even managed to extract a salute from one of our light cruisers, which was lying in the harbour at the time. After that, all trace of him was lost. I showed this paragraph to several other members of the 19 Club, and they all agreed that he was just the lad for us, if only we could get hold of him. It so happened that I knew the editor of the paper which had published the report, and I went round and asked him to let me know if he had heard anything more. He promised to make inquiries, but he wasn't very hopeful. However, roughly 7 weeks later, I got a somewhat cryptic letter from a man in Chiswick. He said he was just back from the East, and understood that I'd been inquiring about a certain person whose name began with K. If I still wanted the information, would I please call at the address on his letter, number 23 something or other Gardens, and ask for John Smith. This I did the same afternoon. Something or other Gardens, and I'm not going to give the name, consisted entirely of red brick villas with apartments to let on the windows. The door was opened to me by an obvious landlady, quite a nice old thing, and when I asked for John Smith, she somehow looked as though she knew it was an assumed name. She said he was expecting me, but would I mind not stopping too long as he'd been ill? I promised not to, of course, and then she showed me into the right-hand front sitting room. It was typically but comfortably furnished. There, I found a nervous little rabbit of a man of about 35, who kept darting to the window and peering out into the street. He also had one of those high voices which have never quite broken. It was so pronounced that it was quite difficult to get used to. We discussed the weather until the landlady got tired of listening at the door, and he admitted what I'd already guessed, and you too probably, that he wasn't John Smith at all, but John Kennedy, the escaped convict himself. He apologised for receiving me in such a hole-and-corner way,